The early morning mist still clung to the quiet streets of Willow Creek, a spectral veil over manicured lawns and sleeping homes. It was September 12th, 1988, a day that began like any other, promising the gentle warmth of a late summer's end. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-kissed grass and distant wood smoke. For Dr. Elias Thorne, a man of precise habits and an even more precise schedule, and his wife Serafina, this meant their customary 6-mile run. Every morning, without fail, their rhythmic footsteps would echo along the winding path that bordered the dense woods at the edge of town, a ritual as ingrained as the sunrise itself. Elias, a respected cardiologist, was known for his unwavering discipline. Serafina, for her quiet elegance and an almost ethereal grace. They were, to all outward appearances, the embodiment of suburban success and marital harmony. But on this particular morning, something shifted. The sun, usually a benevolent observer, cast long, distorted shadows as it struggled to pierce the lingering fog. The birds, typically a symphony of chirps and calls, were eerily silent. A profound stillness settled over the path, a quiet that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. It was a silence that would soon consume the Thornes, swallowing them whole. Hours later, when their absence became too profound to ignore, a frantic call reached the Willow Creek Police Department. Detective Reese Kincaid, a man whose weary eyes had seen too much of humanity's darkness, arrived at the scene, a knot of unease already tightening in his stomach. The path, now bathed in the harsh, unforgiving light of midday, offered no answers, no struggle, no overturned leaves, no broken branches, just the path, pristine and undisturbed. Then he saw them. 2 pairs of running shoes side by side, perfectly aligned on the damp earth. Elias's sturdy, well-worn trainers, laces neatly tied. Serafina's lighter, almost delicate sneakers, equally composed. They weren't discarded, weren't kicked off in haste. They were placed as if their owners had simply stepped out of them and evaporated into the very air they had been breathing moments before. The sight was profoundly unsettling, a tableau of absence that defied logic. Kincaid knelt, his gloved fingers hovering over the immaculate footwear, a chill seeping into his bones that had nothing to do with the morning air. It was the chill of the inexplicable, the cold dread that heralds a mystery that refuses to be solved by conventional means. The shoes were empty, yet they spoke volumes of a departure so sudden, so absolute, that it felt like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. The town of Willow Creek, once a bastion of predictable tranquility, was about to discover that some disappearances leave not a trace, but a gaping, psychological void. The Thorne residence, a sprawling colonial with impeccably maintained gardens, stood as a monument to their carefully curated lives. Inside, everything was in its place. Breakfast dishes neatly stacked in the sink, the morning newspaper folded on the kitchen counter, Serafina's unfinished cup of herbal tea still warm to the touch. It was a house frozen in a moment, a domestic still life violently interrupted. Detective Kincaid moved through the rooms with a methodical slowness, his senses alert to any anomaly, any whisper of discord, but there was none. No signs of forced entry, no ransacked drawers, no hastily packed bags. It was as if the Thornes had simply walked out their front door for their run and never returned, leaving behind a home that hummed with the ghost of their presence. Neighbors, when interviewed, offered little more than platitudes and bewildered expressions. The Thornes were private, reserved, a lovely couple. They kept to themselves, but always with a polite nod, a brief, pleasant exchange. No enemies, no known disputes, no financial troubles that anyone was aware of. Elias was respected at the hospital, known for his calm demeanor and exceptional skill. Serafina, an artist who worked from home, rarely exhibited her work, preferring the quiet solitude of her studio. Their lives were a carefully constructed edifice of normalcy, a fortress against the unpredictable. Yet, the very predictability of their existence now served to amplify the strangeness of their vanishing. Kincaid found himself staring at a blank canvas, every potential brushstroke of a lead dissolving into thin air. The only tangible evidence remained the sneakers, now carefully bagged and tagged. Forensics found no unusual fibers, no foreign soil, nothing to suggest a struggle or an external force. The shoes were simply empty. Kincaid kept returning to that image, the two pairs of shoes, perfectly aligned, a silent testament to an impossible event. It was the kind of detail that gnawed at the edges of his mind, a riddle without a discernible language. He had seen abductions, runaways, even the grim aftermath of accidents. But never this, never an absence so complete, so devoid of any logical explanation. The initial search expanded, involving search and rescue teams, K9 units and aerial surveillance, combing every inch of the surrounding woods and fields. Days bled into weeks, the hope of finding them alive dwindling with each passing hour. The community, initially gripped by fear, began to settle into a creeping unease, a collective shiver of incomprehension. The Thorns hadn't just disappeared. They had, it seemed, ceased to exist, leaving only their footwear as a chilling monument to their vanishing act. As the weeks turned into a month, the official investigation began to slow, the leads exhausted, the theories crumbling under the weight of their own impossibility. But for Detective Kincaid, the case of Elias and Seraphina Thorn became an insidious obsession. He spent countless hours poring over their financial records, their phone logs, their medical histories. He interviewed colleagues, distant relatives, even the barista at their favorite coffee shop. Each conversation painted a picture of a couple who were, on the surface, unremarkable in their perfection. Yet, Kincaid felt a persistent, almost subliminal hum of something amiss beneath that polished veneer. It was in Seraphina's art studio that Kincaid first felt a tangible shift in the narrative. Her paintings, mostly abstract landscapes and portraits, were vibrant, almost aggressively alive, but tucked away in a dusty corner, he found a series of sketches, charcoal on heavy paper, that were starkly different. They depicted figures, often blurred and indistinct, standing at the edge of a deep, swirling void. Their faces, when discernible, held expressions of profound longing or an unsettling serenity. One sketch in particular caught his eye. Two figures, hand in hand, stepping into a shimmering, undefined space, their forms dissolving at the edges. It was a chilling premonition, or perhaps a confession of sorts. He showed the sketches to a local art critic, who dismissed them as interesting, if somewhat derivative of existentialist angst. But Kincaid saw something more. He saw a window into Seraphina's inner world, a world far more complex and perhaps unsettling than anyone in Willow Creek had imagined. Further digging into Elias Thorn's professional life yielded another subtle but significant crack in the facade. A former colleague, Dr. Evelyn Reed, reluctantly admitted to Kincaid that Elias had become increasingly withdrawn in the months leading up to his disappearance. He was brilliant, no doubt, she confided, her voice hushed, but he started talking about patterns, anomalies in patient data that defied medical explanation. He'd spend hours in the library, not on cardiology, but on obscure physics, quantum mechanics. He called it the fabric of reality. We all thought he was just overworked. Kincaid pressed her for details, but Dr. Reed could only recall vague, unsettling pronouncements about thin places and the unseen currents that bind us. Elias, the pragmatic cardiologist, dabbling in theoretical physics and existential philosophy. It didn't fit the image. It was a revelation that didn't provide a suspect or a motive, but it deepened the psychological unease surrounding the case, suggesting that the Thorns themselves might have been engaged in something far beyond the comprehension of their suburban neighbors. Kincaid found himself standing at the edge of a precipice, the conventional tools of his trade failing him. He had no body, no weapon, no witnesses, and now he had two individuals whose inner lives were far more labyrinthine than their outward appearances suggested. The sketches, the cryptic conversations, They weren't clues in the traditional sense, but they were unsettling fragments of a puzzle that seemed to defy any known solution. The case of the vanishing thorns was no longer just a missing persons report. It was becoming a whisper of something profoundly unsettling, a story that suggested the boundaries of the known world were far more porous than anyone dared to imagine. If you're finding yourself drawn into the chilling depths of this mystery, remember to like this video, leave a comment with your theories, and subscribe to Vanished Files for more untold stories that challenge reality. As the official investigation dwindled to a cold case file, Detective Kincaid refused to let go. The Thorns' disappearance had burrowed into his psyche, a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. He found himself revisiting the path where the sneakers were found, not looking for new evidence, but for a feeling, an echo of what might have transpired. The woods, once a comforting backdrop to Willow Creek, now felt charged with an unseen energy, a silent witness to an impossible event. Kincaid began to delve deeper into the obscure texts Elias Thorne had reportedly been reading. Works on quantum entanglement, theories of parallel dimensions, the philosophical implications of observer effect. It was a desperate, almost irrational pursuit, but conventional logic had failed him entirely. He discovered that Elias had been corresponding with a retired theoretical physicist, Dr. Aris Thorne. No relation, but a curious coincidence of surnames, who lived a reclusive life in rural Maine. Kincaid made the journey, a long drive through changing autumn landscapes, hoping for a shred of scientific explanation. Dr. Aris Thorne, a man with wild white hair and eyes that held a distant, knowing gaze, listened patiently to Kincaid's account. He spoke of Elias's fascination with localized space-time anomalies, points where the fabric of reality might thin, allowing for instantaneous, untraceable transitions. He believed, Aris explained, his voice a low rumble, that certain environmental conditions, combined with a specific mental state, could create a resonance, a momentary doorway. Kincaid felt a shiver trace down his spine. It sounded like madness, yet it offered a framework, however fantastical, for the utter lack of evidence. Aris also mentioned that Elias had been particularly interested in the concept of shared consciousness, and how two minds in perfect synchronicity might amplify such an effect. Back in Willow Creek, Kincaid revisited Serafina's art. He noticed a recurring symbol in her later sketches, a subtle, almost imperceptible spiral, often hidden within the brushstrokes of her more abstract pieces. It was a motif he'd dismissed as artistic flourish, but now, combined with Elias's theoretical pursuits, it took on a new, unsettling significance. He remembered a local legend, a half-forgotten tale whispered by the town's oldest residents, about an ancient standing stone deep within the very woods where the Thorns ran. It was said to be a place of strange energies, a whispering stone, where the veil between worlds was thin. Kincaid had dismissed it as folklore, but now every piece of the puzzle, however disparate, seemed to point towards something beyond the mundane. He found the stone, almost completely overgrown, deep within the woods, not far from the running path. It was a rough, uncarved monolith, humming with an almost imperceptible vibration. He placed his hand on its cold surface, and for a fleeting moment he felt a profound disorientation, a sense of falling upwards. The air around him seemed to shimmer. The culmination of Kincaid's unconventional investigation led him back to the Thorne residence, not to search for clues, but for understanding. He sat in Serafina's studio, surrounded by her art, the unsettling sketches of dissolving figures now feeling less like artistic expression and more like a prophetic journal. He looked at Elias's meticulously organized study, at the books on theoretical physics and the highlighted passages about quantum tunneling and the multiverse. The pieces, though individually absurd, began to form a terrifyingly coherent picture. Elias, the brilliant but increasingly isolated cardiologist, driven by an intellectual curiosity that bordered on obsession, and Serafina, the enigmatic artist, whose inner world seemed to already exist on the fringes of reality. They weren't just a couple, they were two halves of an equation, their shared routine, their deep unspoken bond, perhaps creating the very conditions for their impossible departure. Kincaid remembered Dr. Aris Thorne's words about shared consciousness and a momentary doorway. He imagined Elias and Seraphina, their bodies in perfect rhythmic motion, their minds synchronized by years of shared life running along that familiar path. The morning mist, the peculiar stillness, the ancient whispering stone hidden nearby. Perhaps these were not coincidences, but catalysts. The sneakers, left so meticulously, seemed less like a mystery and more like a deliberate act, a final, silent statement. They hadn't been violently taken. They had been willingly, perhaps even eagerly, shed. The twist wasn't a hidden assailant or a secret life, but the chilling implication that the Thornes had, through some unknown combination of scientific pursuit, spiritual resonance, and sheer will, transcended the physical plane. They hadn't been abducted. They had ascended, or perhaps simply stepped sideways into a reality imperceptible to the rest of us. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. It meant there was no killer to catch, no ransom note to find, no conventional justice to seek. It meant the world was far stranger, far more porous than Kincaid had ever dared to believe. He felt a profound sense of isolation, burdened by a truth too outlandish to share, too impossible to prove. The psychological suspense wasn't just about the Thornes' fate, but about the very nature of reality itself, now irrevocably altered in Kincaid's mind. He stood by the window, looking out at the quiet, unsuspecting streets of Willow Creek, a town that believed in concrete facts and logical explanations. He knew the truth, or at least his version of it, would forever remain a silent, unsettling whisper in the annals of unsolved mysteries. If this mind-bending journey into the inexplicable has captivated you, please hit the like button. Share your wildest theories in the comments below, and subscribe to Vanished Files for more stories that defy explanation. The case of Elias and Seraphina Thorne officially remained unsolved, a cold file gathering dust in the Willow Creek Police Department archives. Detective Rhys Kincaid eventually retired, but the Thornes' disappearance never truly left him. It was a shadow that followed him, a constant reminder of the limits of human understanding and the fragility of perceived reality. He never spoke of his theories, of the quantum physics, the ancient stone, or the unsettling art. He knew such talk would brand him as eccentric, perhaps even delusional. But in the quiet solitude of his later years, he often found himself staring at the horizon, wondering if the Thornes had found what they were looking for, if they had truly stepped into another dimension, another existence. The sneakers, the only tangible remnants of their lives, were eventually returned to their distant relatives, who kept them in a dusty box, a morbid curiosity. They were a monument to absence, a chilling testament to a vanishing act that defied every law of nature and every tenet of human logic. Willow Creek slowly healed, the initial shock giving way to a lingering, almost mythical unease. The path where they disappeared became a place whispered about in hushed tones, a local legend of the impossible. Children were warned not to venture too deep into the woods, not because of wild animals, but because of the unspoken fear of what else might be lurking there, waiting to claim another soul. The Thornes' story became a cautionary tale, a psychological scar on the otherwise idyllic facade of the town. It was a reminder that even in the most mundane of settings, the extraordinary can erupt without warning, leaving behind only questions and an unsettling void. Their disappearance wasn't a crime in the traditional sense. It was an event, a phenomenon, a tear in the fabric of the everyday. And for Kincaid, it was a profound lesson that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but merely contemplated, leaving us to grapple with the unsettling truth that the world is far more complex, far more mysterious than we could ever imagine. The empty shoes on a dewy path in 1988 continue to whisper of an impossible journey, a silent invitation to ponder the true nature of reality and the chilling possibility that some vanishings are not about where people went, but where they chose to go.